So in the most general sense, menopause is basically women's reproductive system kind of winding down. When a woman no longer has any viable eggs, the system sort of shuts itself off.
It really comes down to what works for you and how better you can adhere to it.
Probably this is just going a little bit away from PCOS, but I think it is worth mentioning. You talk about acne roughly being usually common in PCOS, but when we talk about acne and menstrual cycle,
Yes.
generally tend to be around the late luteal phase. What seems to be the cause of it? Is it preventable? Is it fixable?
Okay, so for listeners who may have not heard the first one, or I know it's way back when, right? The standard menstrual cycle. In the second half of the cycle, progesterone levels go up and then back down, estrogen levels go up and back down. Now, progesterone binds to the testosterone receptor and inhibits the effect, right? Progesterone tends to clear up the skin, right? Most women will report right after ovulation, like that third week of the cycle, skin looks great, acne and stuff clears up. I think what's happening as progesterone drops, it's just kind of a rebound effect. And honestly, to my knowledge, no, there's not really a whole lot that can be done about that. It's just a consequence of falling progesterone. Same thing with water retention. Progesterone tends to cause women's bodies to drop water because it binds to a different receptor. When it falls in week 4, there's a rebound effect where women's bodies hold more sodium and hold more water. So unfortunately, no.
Do you think people that tend to have issues with acne, they should be avoiding certain things when they, like in regards to the diet, or reducing certain things like saturated fats, or like people, like women generally tend to want to have some chocolate or
Right.
savory things or cheese or whatever it is in that special late luteal phase where the cravings go up. So is that something that you could associate, that perhaps is that related, that perhaps appetite increase, intake increases, and that might worsen it? Or
I'll be honest in that I've never really looked that deeply into diet and acne. Like, I know there is some research that milk can seem to cause acne in some people. I think there is an insulin effect that, if you are, that can be part of it. Acne is really complicated and there's so many different types. And I think I think most of it is hormonal, but I think certainly eating, excessive amounts of sugar and highly refined carbohydrates, and I think, as we talked about, women are a little more insulin resistant in the second half of the cycle. And one of the things I recommend dietarily is to lower carbohydrates a little bit, because like we just talked about, that tends to be best when you're insulin resistant. Like I said, unless you're going to eat salad all day. So I think that will generally help, but a lot of it is just the effects of progesterone going up and having beneficial, and then when it crashes, it crashes.
Okay.
So I know we're going to talk about birth control maybe later. I don't know if we got more about PCOS, but there's the most recent type of birth control that was developed. It's called drospirenone. It's a synthetic progesterone. It's in Yasmin and Yaz. It is more like a woman's natural progesterone than anything that came before it. And women love it because it has exactly that effect I just described. Cleans up the skin, reduces acne, because it's blocking testosterone from having its effect at the receptor. It can cause a little bit of water weight loss. Yaz, women love Yaz, whereas some of the earlier birth controls had more of a androgenic effect and could actually cause acne, especially the very earliest form. The newer ones, not so much, but like in the 70s, the early forms of birth control were notorious for causing acne breakouts and all kinds of issues. So yeah, I think it's mostly hormonal, but certainly limiting sugar intake. I think women, if you're sensitive to dairy, might be, but again, acne is just there's so much going on.
Yeah.
I tried to get into it at one point, and it's like there's so many factors, and it's whatever the specific bacteria is. Acne, it's not acne vulgaris, but it's like P. acne and antibiotics, and there's so much going on.
Like why sometimes around ovulation and that late luteal phase, women seem to be more propense to have migraines. Do you have anything that you can add to that part of the puzzle?
So it's just low estrogen. It's dropping estrogen levels. And what you see is, so like I said, 4-week cycle, right? In the first 2 weeks, right after menstruation is day 1, right? Estrogen goes up and then crashes. That's the ovulation headache, is when estrogen drops. Luteal phase, estrogen comes back up and then drops. And so it's falling estrogen. I pulled up a paper while you were talking titled Migraine and Estrogen. And it's falling estrogen levels for women that are prone to it. What can you do? Soy protein at 25 to 30 grams per day to provide phytoestrogens, right? We know that there are these plant forms of estrogen that have a mild signaling effect, but they do have an effect. So 25 to 30 grams per day of soy protein, or 50 to 100 milligrams of isolated. The two phytoestrogens that are key, I'll mispronounce these, it's diadazine, D-I-A-D-Z-E-I-N, it's something like that. And then genestine, G-E-N-I-E-S-T. I don't know. It's the two phytoestrogens. It's the best I can do. Those will provide some estrogen signaling, and I think that's worth trying. I know women, like the women I know that have had really severe PMS, and a lot of it is just dropping estrogen. And the same thing happens at menopause, which I know you wanted to touch briefly on. That when you replace that estrogen, and I would tell them just take phytoestrogens that final week of the cycle, and I could see it even 2 or 3 days before ovulation, and it does seem to have a benefit.
Perfect.
So,
all right, let's move on very quickly to menopause. So I know this is a very complex topic, and I just wanted to ask you the question that seems to be very common currently in women. Obviously, there's a lot of changes going on, but what happens when someone is going into perimenopause, transitioning to menopause? There's so many things going on with their hormones.
Yes.
How much is too much when you are trying to fix, because you're more likely to gain body fat around your middle section. You are more prone to be tired, more exhausted, experience lots of different symptoms related to menopause. Doing too much might get worse. I think you have to find that middle, fine line, whether doing too much is not good, but doing too little isn't good either. So what is your approach when it comes to managing fat loss and menopause, and obviously in this huge amount of different factors that you have to pay attention to?
Right, and that's part of what makes it so difficult. So in the most general sense, menopause is basically women's reproductive system kind of winding down. When a woman no longer has any viable eggs, the system sort of shuts itself off. Now, before actual menopause, there's what's called perimenopause. Peri just means near or around. And this can last 3 or 4 years as things kind of start and hormones just start doing wacky things, to use a technical term. They just kind of they change and then change again as things are sort of progesterone. Once she stops releasing eggs, progesterone won't go up and estrogen may be a little bit dominant, and then testosterone can become dominant for a little while. And then at full-blown menopause, which is defined as not having a period for 12 months. That's the clinical. So if a woman has no period for 11 months and then has one, she got to start all over again. She is not technically in menopause, and it resets to 1.
Okay.
And once a woman has not had a period for 12 months at that point in her life, and it can be anywhere between 40 and even the early 50s, but I think late 40s tends to be most average. She is in menopause, at which point her estrogen levels are something like 30% of where they were before. Her progesterone levels will essentially be 0 or as close to it. And this causes, like you said, a stunning number of effects. Migraine is one of them, sleep issues, neurological issues. Women's brains are very sensitive to hormone levels. There's the list of potential hot flashes, the list of potential side effects is enormous. And some of these can start in perimenopause. You tend to see, like you said, a shift in body fat patterning, where women, and it's funny, when I was in my 20s, I had older clients, and I had some women that didn't go on hormone replacement, and some women that did at menopause. And the women that didn't, all their body fat kind of moved from their lower body to their midsection. And the women that did, it didn't. And I was just like, it's got to be hormonal. I didn't know. I mean, I was 25. I didn't know anything about anything. But I'm like, that was really an early observation. I'm like, something about hormone replacement is causing this. And now we know that that's exactly what's going on. There's a loss of bone mineral density, loss of muscle mass. As body weight and body fat increases, estrogen is very important for women's skeletal muscle recovery. Activity tends to go down spontaneously. Estrogen is very involved in that. All of this can contribute to the weight gain, the fat gain, that occurs. And we know this because women who go on hormone replacements, by and large, avoid this. If they go on synthetic hormones or even bioidenticals. So it really is falling hormone levels. So how much is too much? I'm going to address this by, do you know who Amanda Phoebe is by any chance?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, good. Actually, if you want to talk about menopause, get her on the show because her book is fantastic. I read it several weeks ago, and she's been active her whole life, trained like a maniac, hit menopause, and as she sort of talks about in her book, she's like, all of a sudden, I was tired all the time, but her identity was going in and training her brains out, and she's like, and I wanted to do that, but I couldn't because I would try and I would just be done. I would be too tired, and at the time she was writing this, like, it's not talked about that much, right? It's changing, but it's still like, oh, this is just this thing that happens to women, and we're just gonna just pretend that it's not. But it is critical. It is what 50%, 51% of the planet is women who are eventually going to go through this. This is not a joke, and it is very, very serious. And so she's written her book about the changes she had to make and how she approached things. I don't know if you've read it, in terms of her training, in terms of listening to her body, finding ways to be more active. But yeah, if you're not able to train intensely, you can still go do a workout. She's got her metabolic circuits, and to sort of get something done without it being super hyper intense, because more so if you're coming from an inactive background, right, to expect to be able to go in and do, interval training and high intensity weight room work right off the bat is going to lead to failure for no other reason than you're going to feel like, I can't do this, but you don't have to. So I know this isn't particularly answering which she's probably more qualified than I am, but there are changes that are occurring. With the drop in estrogen, there is frequently development of insulin resistance. So you'll see a common theme. But I mean, even without insulin resistance, most people don't need that many carbs, right? This whole idea that, that the standard diet should be 70 to 70, or whatever it is, 65 to 75% carbs, might have been true 40 years ago when we didn't have the refined carbs available that we have now. But in the modern era, that is not good advice as far as I'm concerned, because that's not what we now know that higher protein is superior. More protein becomes more important with age. Older individuals don't utilize protein as well. They may need double what a younger person needs just to start, right? They may need 1.5 grams per kilo just as a starting point, whereas the usual, at least in the US, the daily is 0.8 grams per kilo, something like that, somewhere in that range. So again, the same story. Increasing dietary protein helps with everything. Moderating carbs helps with most. How many carbs do you need if most of what you do is this, right? And sit in front of a computer and are not super duper active. So it's a matter of, yes, I think, like I said, I'm not giving, because when you look at the papers that are like, oh, exercise recommendations for women in menopause, it's always the same advice. Aerobic activity 3 to 5 times a week, 20 to 60 minutes, weight training 2 to 3 days per week. I will say that weight training for women as they enter menopause becomes that much more important because of the loss of bone mineral density, right? That is absolutely critical. And that is a place where if a woman had to choose, I would rather see her doing proper progressive weight training than this is a place where there's a lot of myths. Oh, want to improve your bone mineral density? Go walk 3 days a week. Would you like to know how much of an effect that has on bone density? Unless you have severe osteoporosis. Walking will not do anything for you. Even jogging won't do a whole lot, because what stimulates bone to increase its density is high peak forces, like jumping, right? Gymnasts, sprinters, it's not, this is walking. Yeah. This is jogging, and this is sprinting or jumping. That's jumping, right? And it's that or heavy weight training that stimulates. So most of the advice given in terms of exercise for improving bone mineral density is garbage. Again, you have to balance that against what you can do on any given day.
When it comes to fat loss, now moving to a more general question, rapid fat loss. I know you have written a book about rapid fat loss affecting women versus men. Does it happen differently? Is it women prone to lose fat the same rate as men when you put them in a protocol of rapid fat loss? Is it better for women? Is it worse? What is your stance on this?
So the first question is a little hard to answer. Do women lose weight at the same rate as men? And the answer is no, but predominantly because they're smaller and can't create the same size deficits. There's a couple of other complicated reasons. As far as the rapid fat loss, there are probably more negative consequences for women in terms of the effects on hormones, menstrual cycle dysfunction, potentially in that regards. And I don't remember if we talked about that in the previous one as far as menstrual cycle dysfunction or what causes that. Very briefly, when women undereat relative to their activity level, the body tends to shut, basically the body, says, okay, we've only got so many calories to work with, right? They call it energy availability. It's basically how many calories are left to the body between how much you're eating and how much you're exercising. When that goes below a certain point, the body has to go, okay, we got to make a choice here. Like what do we have to keep running to stay alive, right? Brain's got to work, heart has to pump, liver has to do whatever the liver does, right? Do we need to keep growing hair? No. Fingernails? Not really, right? What do people often report during dieting, right? Their nails don't grow as well. Their hair doesn't. Some women, their hair will fall out. Some men, their hair will fall out. The women's reproductive organs use a tremendous number of calories. So, and they're not critical for survival in the short term. So by shutting that down, it saves a tremendous number of calories for the important stuff. Bone mineral density can be lost because building bone takes a lot of energy. And if you lose a little bone right in the next 2 or 3 months, you're not going to die, right? Immune system stops working as well. Because again, in the short term, you're not going to die. You might get sick, but you're not going to. So, but the take home of this is what research has found is that there's a certain kind of critical level that when women go below that, their body starts to slow everything down and hormones adapt. And I don't want to get into the numbers too much because it's not that important. There hasn't been a lot of research on men, but where research has been done is that you have to take men about twice as low, right? So the critical energy availability for women is 30 kilocalories per kilogram of lean body mass. At that level, men will not see any hormonal dysfunction. If you take a man to 15, right, cut his calories twice as hard, he still might not see an effect on reproductive function, on bone density, on anything. Women's bodies are always hit harder by this stuff. So in that sense, a rapid fat loss approach can potentially take women below it'll take women below their critical threshold to a much greater degree. A man may not even get to his critical threshold. Men's bodies, and I mean this dead seriously, we are simple from top to bottom, right? Our reproductive system is simple. I'm going to pander a little bit psychologically, pretty simple. Like we are. Women's bodies are because they're much more responsible for survival of the human race. So men's bodies are just more robust. They're just not hit as hard. Whereas women's body, so in that sense, yes, rapid fat loss can potentially be more negative for women, especially in the long term. Right? Yeah. When they first started to see this, it was back in the 90s, and it was in long distance runners who want to stay very, very skinny and don't eat enough. Ballet, gymnastics, figure skating, the sports that were really focused on being thin for performance. And you would look at how much the women were training and how much they were eating, and there was just this vast mismatch. Now that can happen in female dieters. However, all of this stuff really only matters once you get pretty lean, right? You do not see menstrual cycle dysfunction in women carrying 35% body fat.
Yeah.
Well, I take that back. The one exception is bariatric surgery. But with bariatric surgery, people will lose 50% of their current body weight in a matter of months. Like the effect is so huge. But really until women get to 20 to 24% body fat or so, the effects aren't that big of a deal. And one thing I'm very emphatic about in my rapid fat loss is how long you can stay on an extreme approach. It depends on how lean you are, right? If you're carrying 40% body fat and you want to do this for 8 weeks, you absolutely can, right? There's a famous study. So man, he was given no food for like over 370 days. You've probably seen the paper. All he gave him was a water and a multivitamin and multi-mineral. And he lost 100 kilos, some ridiculous amount of weight. Now, could they have kept him on that once he got lean? Absolutely not. But if a woman is lean, if she's 22% body fat, then we might question why are you trying to lose fat at that, this rapidly at that level? I would say no more than 2 weeks. because any longer than that and the potential for negatives is going to drastically increase. Also, on the rapid fat loss, and this is where people mess up. I tell them, look, too much activity makes it worse. And people are so psychologically trained. Well, if I want to lose fat, the more exercise I do, the better, right? So when I come along and go, no, actually, too much exercise is worse than not, they don't listen. And invariably, people that have the worst responses to my rapid fat loss diet are the ones that keep doing too much aerobic activity, and they don't listen to me. So in that sense, yes, calories are coming down, but ideally activity should come down too. You need like 2 heavy weight training workouts, but it should be for leaner women, it should be very limited in duration.
Let me ask you something.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So how much per week do you consider to be rapid fat loss? Like how much do you need to lose to be rapid?
The answer to that, again, depends on starting body fat percentage.
Okay.
So someone who is carrying, say, 40% body fat, right? They may be, say, 80 or 90 kilos as a female, whatever that works out to. In some of the research, they may be able to lose 4 to 5 pounds of fat per week, like real fat, not just water. Because if you look at, if you put them on 600 calories a day or 400 calories a day, the deficit is like 2,000 calories per day for maintenance, right? It's huge. And that's, what is that? 14,000 calories per week divided by, that's nearly 5 pounds.
Okay.
When you've got a leaner woman who may be 55 kilos at 22%, rapid for her might be 2 pounds, because realistically, she cannot create a bigger deficit than that. There's just no possible way, unless she's doing, 6 hours of aerobic, some insane amount of activity, at which point that few calories would kill her performance would just, so it could be, and for some women, and I know we've got this idea, sorry, I should put this in kilos. Someone carrying excess body fat, 2.5 kilos a week. For a leaner woman, 3/4 of a kilo to 1 kilo might be very rapid. And that's, go ahead.
If it was in percentage, like when we say, well, 1% or above is a bit too aggressive, how much would you say would be a rapid fat loss? Over, obviously, over 1%?
Again, it would depend on body fat percentage. I think someone who is, 100 kilos, who's losing, 3 kilos or two, that would be 2.5%. But for that body fat percentage, that may be completely reasonable. There's so much fat to be lost.
Yes.
You don't see a lot of metabolic adaptation. Whereas the leaner woman, if you're looking at 16 kilos, you might be looking at 1%, maybe a little bit higher, because if you look at some of the numbers that people throw out, they're like, okay, if you're this body, you can get, 1 to 1.5%. But once you get leaner, you're targeting maybe 0.5% per week. And you've got some maybe 1% if you're really pushing it, but so it's good. And then in the middle range, you're somewhere between 1 and 3%. If you're carrying 30% body fat, aggressive rapid might be 2% per week.
Okay.
So it scales with body weight and body fat percentage.
Okay, got it. How do you program a rapid fat loss phase? How would you program it? How would you periodize it within a nutrition macrocycle or mesocycle?
Right. So a lot of that would depend on goals. So let's sort of talk about first, just like the person who's carrying excess body fat, who's just starting, right? Here we have a balance. So the typical recommendation is pick small small changes over the long term. But here's what I think people forget. If someone has, say, 30 to 40 kilos of fat that they want to lose, and you're telling them, I want you to lose 0.5 kilo a week, they're going to quit, because you've just told them this is going to take you 80 weeks. This is going to take you 1.5 years. That's not tenable psychologically. Yeah. Now, the danger is there was early research that rapid weight loss programs cause a greater rebound. However, there's also research that faster initial fat loss gives better results in the long term. Yeah, it's a little more complicated. Maybe the people who genetically lose faster get better results. We don't really know. But I think we have to balance giving sufficient initial results, right? This is why people love keto. What happens with keto? The first 3 or 4 days, you drop like 2 to 3 kilos. It's all water, but man, the scale just plummets and everyone loves it. Whereas then they eat carbs and it goes right back up and they freak out. But I think there's a a balance to be struck. You need to give rapid enough results to see. So with someone who's starting, I think there's some potential benefit of starting with a rapid approach to get some quick fat loss results, right? If I can take, if 4 to 8 weeks of that type of extreme approach can take 8 to 10 kilos off of someone of actual fat loss who's very carrying excess body fat, that gets them, what, 25% of the way to their goal right off the bat. And there may be other advantages, right? We know that people coming into this who are carrying excess body fat probably have long eating habits that are just, entrenched. Their taste buds have adapted a certain way. A lot of women, as you know, aren't eating enough protein. The key to setting up a proper rapid diet is it should be based on whole foods, include activity, and ideally you work on, behavior change. But if you look at all the early studies on rapid weight loss, it was always these liquid diets with no activity. Of course you rebound. You haven't learned how to eat. You haven't changed anything about your real world eating habits. So as long as they're based around whole foods, which helps reprogram eating habits, activity, which we know is almost more important for maintenance, and behavior changes, that's where rapid approaches can work better in the long term. So I think doing that for, whether it's 4 weeks, potentially 8, where you get enough protein, fruits and vegetables, essential fats, you've created a baseline to go, okay, you've lost 8 to 10 kilos of actual fats. Now let's start to bring foods back in. Taste buds take about 6 weeks to adapt. Someone who's very used to lots and lots of refined sugar, lots of refined carbohydrates, that may give their body a chance, their taste buds and their brain a chance to adapt all those systems that are tending to drive their food intake. And you bring carbs back in and bring dietary fats back in to a moderate deficit. Now, at some point you might go, okay, we're hammering along, everything's good. Let's do another couple weeks. Something else I've been programming more recently, right? Because it is straight rapid fat loss can be tough, right?
Yes.
Some people love it. People have done my diet and they're like, oh yeah, I stuck to it for months and never had a problem. And some people, you can only eat so much chicken breast, right? It gets very boring. Something I've started really addressing. It's just not conducive to life, right? You want to go out and have a social event, and we can talk about free meals and refeeds and maintenance, but there's an approach that's coming through the research called alternate day fasting, where you do a very low calorie day with a normal eating day. Like not a refeeding, not a cheat day where you just eat normally. Then you do a very low calorie day and a normal day, and a low calorie day and a normal day. You just kind of alternate. And what ends up happening is that on the maintenance days, folks eat anywhere from 10% below to 10% above maintenance, right? Because one day of hard dieting doesn't make you that hungry, right? We've all been a little hungry for one day. But when you look at the weekly deficit, it still ends up being like 30% below maintenance because you're eating like 25% 4 days a week and roughly maintenance 3 days a week. And you get this that can be a nice compromise. Doesn't work for everybody. If someone does that and finds that they're overeating on the maintenance days. So I realize that there's just so many options and they can all potentially work based on the person. If someone tells me, look, I want to exercise, or someone, the consultation I did last night, she does a dance class 3 times a week, 90 minutes of like ballet, jet. To have her on very low calories every day, she wouldn't be able to do that, which she enjoys. I said, okay, cool. On those days, eat at maintenance because she's already in that habit. On the other days, eat very low calories. You might not get as fast a fat loss, but you'll still get a nice rate while being able to sustain your lifestyle and being able to have dinner with your family. So yeah, if someone would do excess body fat, maybe 8 straight weeks. And during that, if they wanted to have, the occasional meal that off their diet for psychological benefits, great. For some people, that throws them off their diet. Depends on the person.
Yeah,
I can't give that many absolutes. For some people, when they start dieting, they're just like, boom, diet mode. And if they have that meal out that's off the diet, they can't get back in the right mindset. That depends on you. That depends on the person. Then after 8 weeks, you start to bring carbs and calories back in to create more of a moderate deficit. And even then, like, there's nothing to say that, let's say you're on a moderate diet, like you've done 8 weeks of rapid, 4 weeks, 6, whatever it is. Now we're in a moderate deficit. Well, one day you're just busy and not that hungry. Boom, do a rapid fat loss day. Do it 1 day a week. And then go back to eating, you can throw it in occasionally. There's a paper I read years ago He said, is fasting the ultimate diet? Like not eating anything. And I don't think people should, but his point was you create the biggest deficit. Some people find that when they don't eat anything, they're less hungry than when they eat a little bit. It's just one of those things. But his point was this teaches people that they can be hungry and not die, right? So I told people this too, like, okay, when you're at maintenance, maybe if you start to feel like your body fat's creeping up, throw in a couple rapid fat loss days. Doesn't have to be many, just to take that extra half kilo off. Maybe throw it in once a week proactively, right? There's nothing that says that when you're dieting, you have to eat the same amount every day. There's nothing that says that at maintenance, you got to eat the same amount every day. If throwing in one low calorie day a week helps prevent you from backsliding, cool. Like what? So that would be at that level. For someone who's in like a moderate body fat range, say 25 to 35%, they might consider 4 weeks as a Kickstarter. They might not want to do, or they might do it a few days a week. For women who are very lean, 24% and lower, right? Then we got to ask, okay, what are they trying to lose fat for? Are they dieting down for physique show? Are they an athlete who needs to get to 12% for performance reasons? Do they just want to be a little bit leaner? We might ask, how established are their current habits? Because there is a population of women. There's a population of people, men and women. Women are more likely to be dieting. That's the only reason I'm not trying to single women out. That despite being relatively normal weight, are still dieting. It's just it's kind of inherent to women's experiences in the modern world. And they are almost the ones that can get into bigger trouble with terrible dieting because they're more likely to lose muscle. They're more likely to get into some of the hormonal problems we talked about, that when they diet improperly, and many of them do, because what are they reading? The juice fast, the water fast, the this fast, the stuff that might work for someone carrying excess fat can really mess up a woman at 22%. So what are her base habits? Maybe rapid fat loss isn't right for her, but if she wants to do it, 2 weeks tops, and then move back to maintenance.
Okay.
There is the other possibility, and this is something that I think goes back to your original question. Let's say you have, I don't know if you work with physique athletes, okay, right? They are a specific situation. And as much as I think we can learn from them, there are considerations that get left out. One of the big differences, if you are a physique athlete, you have to be at goal on this day, right? Your contest is Saturday, March, whatever. And if you're not ready, that's bad, right?
Yeah.
Even for performance athletes is not as strict because they usually have, a runner is going to compete for 3 months. Same thing with a power lifter. I've got a power lifter. She has to be at her goal weight on Friday before the day of the meet, right? There is no flexibility.
Yeah.
For the general dieter, that's not the case. There is no, can it be beneficial to set, but there is no, you don't have to be like, okay, yes, spring break, wedding, they may have a self-imposed goal. So let's say you've got a physique dieter and you get behind schedule. Maybe they started too late. Maybe they're a little bit fatter. Maybe, who knows? Well, now what? You've got a time frame. You don't have the option of not being on schedule.
Yeah.
That would be a possibility. Going, okay, you're a pound, you're half a kilo, 3/4 of a kilo behind where we need you to be. That would be a possible place to go, okay, for the next 2 weeks, or maybe even 1 week, we're gonna do a rapid, we're gonna do an extreme diet for 5 to 7 days, maybe 2 weeks, to try to get you back on schedule. The thing is, I've talked to some coaches, and their experience is that men can get away with it much more easily than women. And I think it's for the reasons we talked about.
Yes, correct.
You've got men's critical level is here, women's critical level is here. A rapid approach will take a woman to here and be below the critical level, but won't take a man to the same level. So the thing is, you may not have a choice, right? You may not have any options beyond, we got to do something, or we got to pick a different show, right? Those are your options, but better to not get into that situation. But that would be a place where if you need it, I would say keep it in your pocket. So if you don't need it, don't use it. But if you got no other, and with that, and maybe this leads into the next question to talk about things like refeeds, maintenance days, diet breaks. I do think women probably should do these things somewhat more frequently than men. Now, there's not a lot of research. I'm sure, well, there's been a couple recent studies looking at diet breaks that aren't as supportive as I would probably like them, but I don't think they're designed to really represent what people are doing. The most recent one was 3 weeks of dieting, 1 week break, 3 weeks, 1 week. I'm like, I would never program it like that. I would give 2 weeks every 10. Like, I don't know why they did it this way. Probably because they haven't read my book or didn't talk to me. But regardless, there is limited research that even with women go below that critical level, that 2 days at maintenance can reverse those hormonal effects. 1 day doesn't get it done. 1 day of so if a physique athlete is in that situation and has to do an extreme diet, the first thing she might have to do after those 5, 7, 10, 11, 12 days is come to maintenance for 2 to try to get the system back to normal before moving back into her standard diet. But even that would still accelerate her fat loss to hopefully get her back on schedule. So that would kind of be the way I might program it. As for the general dieter carrying a lot of fat, maybe kickstart it, do it the day, occasional day here or there. And if you're like, I want a couple more weeks where I just want to get a little faster to my goal because I'm getting frustrated, and then move back into moderate dieting, where you sort of just kind of wave it up and down or not, or whatever. Middle range, maybe 4 weeks, same thing. Want to do the occasional low calorie day, not hungry, busy, cool. Lean dieter, trying to get very lean. For women, you got to be a lot more careful with it. If they've only got a little fat to lose, yeah, great. Do it for 2 weeks, be done. Go from 20 to 18% and get it, move on with your life. If they're trying to get to that 10, 12%, don't use it if you don't have to. And if you do have to, you're probably going to need 2 or 3 days at maintenance right at the very end. Like I've written about that, where it's like, even in my rapid fat loss book for lean individuals, I'm like, okay, 11, 12 days of rapid, extremely low calories, you need at least 2 to 3 days of maintenance to try to sort of reset the system.
Yeah.
So that would be, hopefully that answers that.
Awesome. Let me ask you this one last question. And I really wanted to hear about your stance. Like, have your stance on anything on nutrition have changed over the years? Like in some particular topics that you perhaps have this stance on something, and over time with research and things evolving, you have changed your position in something?
Not significantly. Like I think probably the biggest change, and this was back in 2008, was moving from recommending flax oil as an omega-3 source to preformed fish oils, because flax oil just isn't converted very well. That was one. For the most part, I don't think so. I mean, I think I've become more aware of individual variation, especially as it pertains to like some of the flexible dieting strategies. And I know this is one of your questions. I won't get too deep into this. Like when I first wrote about refeeds and free meals and diet breaks in 2004, obviously I was a little more excited about them in terms of reversing hormone, because that's what the data said then. Well, I've got 17 years experience and feedback now. And the reality is that for many people, things like free meals or even refeeds do far more harm than good, right? Because one thing is, these were never required. Bodybuilders, people lost weight for decades without any of this stuff. It was a matter of, can we make things work better? And in many cases, they do. And for athletes, performance, there's a lot of other variables. But for someone who's just starting out, like we talked about, has long-term eating habits that are established, giving them a free meal and saying, look, you can go out and have whatever it is, whatever your particular French fries or whatever you like to eat, they may not be ready for it. They may find that all it does is just re-trigger those cravings.
Yeah.
They may be better off doing 8 to 12 weeks of very straight dieting before they can incorporate. Now, should they develop a flexible attitude to try to get over the good, bad food, black, white thinking? Yes. But are those strategies necessarily right for them? Same thing with, I've kind of gotten away from refeeds. Refeeds has this connotation of like, okay, I need to force feed carbohydrates. A friend of mine years ago was like, it sounds like something you do with cattle, like you would refeed cattle, not humans. And I think she had a point, right? Now I'd rather than look, they're just maintenance days. They're a normal eating day, right? Because that's what that alternate day fasting is showing. They don't tell them to try to eat as many carbs as you can. They're just saying, just eat normally. Psychologically, that changes how people approach them. I dislike the cheat day. Cheating is never good. There is no, right? You cheat on your taxes, you cheat on a test, you cheat on your significant other. There is no meaning of cheating that is good. And all that's doing is making people think, oh, I'm eating foods that I want to eat, but I'm cheating on my diet. No, you're not. The cheat day thing, what I saw people doing was not just eating foods they didn't get to eat on their diet, but seeing how much junk food they could force down till the point they were sick. I'm cheating. I must have a dozen donuts and milkshake. So a lot of my changes come from there. And what I find is a lot of the people who are still really militant about if it fits your macros or whatever, they are lean individuals who spent 10 years establishing psychotic dieting habits. And I'm one of them, right? I'm not using psychotic negatively. Like their eating habits are so locked down that they can do it. But someone starting out may not be ready for that. Now they may try them and go, I tried it. It didn't work for me. Cool, don't do it, right? There is no required strategy to lose fat beyond what will give you the best chance for adherence. So I think that's really, when I was younger, I was very much a, look, if you want to do it, just do it. All I cared about was the physiology and nutrition and the biochemistry. It wasn't till I got a little bit older and matured a little bit. We can't ignore, humans are not just a stomach and a brain. We have the environment, we have society, we have family obligations, we have children, we have all these other factors that have to be taken into account. And I think that's probably in the biggest changes has been my awareness that even in physique diet, there's a bodybuilder right now, his name I forget, and he did it. He tried the refeeds, he tried all that stuff, and all it did was throw him off his diet. For him, it was better to go, okay, for the next 6 months, I'm on. And that's great. But the other thing we forget about physique dieters, they're not trying to keep that fat off long term. And that's a very different situation. Dieting down for 1 day out of the year, knowing that you're going to rebound, is very different than taking the general dieter to a goal they're going to try to maintain. For him, yeah, great. 6 months rigid dieting, he's not going to stay ripped year round. For the average person, finding a flexible attitude approach for long-term adherence, far more important. So I think that's really, but nutritionally, now high protein, I've believed in that since the early days. I might have changed how I program it. The leaner you get, the more you need, the more fat you're carrying, the less you need, but that's microscopic. Should eat, fruits and vegetables, moderate carbohydrates for most people. People still think I'm like, oh, Lyle must just only like ketogenic diets because his first book. Nah, absolutely not. They're useful. They can be very beneficial in many cases, and they're not for everybody. And an athlete, lots and lots of carbs, but yeah, I don't think materially there's really been that, and I don't think I've seen anything in nutrition that's really significantly changed. Like we know, and then we'll wrap it up. We know how to lose fat. We've known this for decades. Your grandmother knew. That's never been the problem. What we need to find in the research in the real world is not how to lose fat in the short term. It's why are people failing in the long term? That's where we're failing people, is why does everybody start to regain it? Is it biological? Some of it. Is it behavioral? Absolutely. Is it environmental? Absolutely, absolutely. What is that? Because if we solve that, if I see another paper that's like high fiber diets help with weight loss, we know that. We don't need another study that vegetables are good for you. We don't need another study that increasing fiber is good. We don't. We get it. How do we get people to adhere in the longer term?
I think that's the major puzzle that we are still trying to discover. It's mostly trying to find out what works for people that can increase adherence, and adherence at the end is going to drive results.
Absolutely. This was years ago, and nobody listened to me. I was like, what's the best diet? Like, assuming it has enough protein, it's the one you can stick to. That's it. They're like, no, there's got to be a perfect magical diet. Again, if you're trying to get 12%, that's a different issue. That's 1% of the dieting population. Fascinating problems, but they're not relevant to the real world, like to the majority. And now that's what all this, their studies are like, yeah, we've done 1 million studies. High carb, low carb, keto, it all works about the same or works just as badly. It's the one you can stick to in the long term. And it's like, yeah, pretty much.
I agree.
That depends on the person. That's probably a good place to wrap it up.
Awesome. Well, Lyle, thank you so much for coming and dedicating all this time for
always
chatting about this. And thank you so much again for dedicating this time for us.
Thanks, Astrid. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or any comments, please comment below, and I'll be sure I'll answer to this as soon as I can.